Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. I hope that you will like what you see and subscribe below for more. In today's video, we are going to be doing an adjustment or alteration to a pair of ready-to-wear pants that I purchased from Target. Over on Instagram, I did like a quick little reel showing you all an adjustment that I made to the waist because the waist was much bigger on the pants that I purchased. And a lot of you requested that I do a YouTube video for it. So today is the day that we adjust a pair of ready-to-wear pants. So when it comes to buying pants off the rack, I rarely do it for the simple fact that I always have this issue as far as me having a waist gap. I usually go up a size, so I usually wear an 18 because they fit me in the thighs and the hips and in the bottom, but the waist is always too big and I always have to adjust it. I don't really like belting the pants and you still have all that excess just kind of poking out from behind the belt. So I rarely buy pants off the rack. I usually just make my own. So I'm really excited for this tutorial. So now I'm going to go ahead and try them on and we can get started with making the adjustment. Alright, so here are the pants that I am going to be adjusting in this video. You can see that they fit me in the hip area, the thighs, the bottom, everything fits except for the waist. These pants have a lot of stretch, so I really like that. But as far as the waist go, they don't have belt loops, so I can't kind of hide any of the excess with the belt. I would need to make an adjustment to the waist. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of pinch out the excess and see just how much needs to come out. And then I'm going to grab my chalk marker and I'm just going to try to put some lines on the back. Now, if you're not familiar with how to pinch out excess fabric and try to mark it, then hopefully you have some help that would be able to do the marking for you, or maybe just put a pin in or something so you can know exactly how much you need to take out. You can also grab a ruler and just kind of look in the mirror as you're pinching to see how much you're pinching out so you'll know how much you need to take from the waist area. All right, now that we have pinched out the excess and kind of put a mark or a pin there, we can go to the table, grab our seam ripper, and start to undo the waistband stitches. Before we get started, I do want to mention that there are more than one way that you can do this adjustment to bring in that waist gap. Number one, I've heard people say that they just insert some elastic in the back and that helps to pull in the excess around the waist. That's an option if you want to do that. My pants have two darts right here, so I can distribute this amount between these darts and the center seam. You can take it all out of the center seam if you want. You can also distribute it in your side seams. So there's more than one way on how you can do this. You don't just have to do it this one way of taking everything out of the center seam. Now for me, because these are my pants, I am okay with just taking everything out of the center seam. But please note that when you do that, you're going to be altering the way that this looks. So your darts are going to come in a little bit more, your pockets may come over a little bit more, and you may also have a little curve right here. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. I made the same adjustment to these pants right here, and you can see right here that it's no longer straight across the top. It kind of dips in a little bit. You can see the darts, they come in at an angle a little bit more, but I'm okay with that. It fits my body, I'm good. But again, you have other options if you don't want to take it all out here. Now let's go ahead and grab our seam ripper so we can take off the labels and undo our stitches. I also want you to make a mental note of the stitches that you do see. I see some understitching right here on the inside of the waistband, and I don't see any stitches on this outside waistband, but I do see it here, so that tells me that they did a stitch in the ditch. So make sure that you look at your pants to see if you are familiar with the stitches that you will need to do before you start to unpick stitches. And of course, be sure that you practice on a used pair, not a new pair if you've never done this before. And for those of you that have never used a seam ripper, I'm just pulling this apart to take off, to cut the threads. That's all I'm doing here. All right, now that we have those off, I'm going to start taking the stitch out right here. Now these pants have stretch in them, and I don't want to stretch too much. So I'm going to be really gentle when I am taking out these stitches. Since they already have stretch in them, I don't want to overstretch it and then it gets really wavy looking. So I'm just going to take my time and undo these stitches. All right, so I have just unpicked the stitches right here from the facing waistband. You can see this is open. And so now I'm going to go ahead and unpick the stitches holding this waistband to the pants. And I'm doing that because I looked at this center seam and it's not just stitched straight down like you would see a normal seam stitched. This actually has this seam allowance stitched in it as well. If you see right here, I can't lift this all the way up like I can here. So it looks as though they stitched this down, catching in this portion of the seam allowance. So I am going to work on this separately. I wanted to go ahead and do it together and then clip off the excess, finish off the seam. But because of this, I need to do it separately so I make sure that when I do stitch it, everything is nice and smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and undo some of this and see where we are. All right, now that I have this all separated here, the waistbands are off away from the pants. I'm also going to cut down the center of my waistband because again, we need to take out the excess fabric. So I'm gonna have a center seam that I'm going to match up with this center seam so everything will be nice and clean. All right, now that we just made this cut, it just got real. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn my pants right side out. I'm gonna try them on to see just how much I need to bring in here. So everything is nice and smooth and seamless going up to these markings right here on the waistband. So I'm gonna go ahead and try them on right now, and then we can go ahead and start taking it out of the center seam going up toward the waistband. All right, so I am back from the mirror. I tried the pants on right side out and you see I have some new chalk markings right here. So I have markings coming in sort of like a V right here. This is the excess that I need to take out of the pants and this will continue on up toward the waistband. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab some pins and then I'm going to pin out along the marking. And so I'm just pinning this like I would a dart. So I'm pinning through one of the marking legs and I'm coming through on the other side to pin that down. So I make sure I'm taking in an even amount. And this is 2 inches total. So it's 1 inch on both sides of the center seam that I'm taking out. And I'm just gonna taper that down to nothing. And I'm gonna end up right on the original stitch. Now we cannot stitch this like we would a dart by starting at the widest part and then stitching down to the point. If we do that, then we're gonna end up with a point right here coming out of our bottom, and we don't want that. So you want to start at the widest point and then kind of curve and taper that down to stay on that same stitching line that's on the original pants. That way it just blends in naturally and you'll just have this curve right here, curving and contouring to your back, going up to the waist. So I'm gonna go to the machine. I'm gonna baste this in place now because I wanna try it on again to make sure that I didn't take out too much, or if I need to take in more, I can go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and baste this in place now. All right, so here is an example of what I meant when I said you have to make sure that you do not create a point like you would on a dart. So you can see this point right here is poking out of my bottom. So I have to make sure I bring this down a little bit further to take out this point right here. So I'm gonna go back to the sewing machine. This is why we baste it in place before we add our permanent stitches, so we can try everything on as we go. So if you're getting this point right here, you need to continue stitching this down a little bit further so that it blends in a lot smoother. So I'm going to go back and make that adjustment now. Alright, you can see right here that I have eliminated that point that was poking out right here, and all I did was just continue down a little bit further so that it wasn't a point but just more curving into the original stitch and then coming out. So if you're getting to that point, just take your stitch down a little bit further to smooth that out. And so now I can go back to the sewing machine and I can stitch along this basting stitch with the regular machine stitch. Alright, so I just stitched in the regular stitch on top of my basting stitch, and you can see I also went ahead, I trimmed off the excess, and then I finished the seam allowance off with my serger. I put in some olive thread so that it kind of matches. Now down here you can see where I said that they had some of the seam allowance stitched down, so I was trying to pull a little bit of that up without taking the entire seam out. So this is what that looks like in that area. It's not perfect, but I'm happy with it. So this is right there along the center seam. So now that we have that done, we can start to work on the waistband. All right, so for our waistband, I have my markings right here, and we're gonna do this the same way that we did for the center seam. So we had like an angle, somewhat like a dart, how it was a little bit more fabric toward the upper portion, but then we angled it down so that it blended into the seam. We're gonna do the same thing again for the waistband. So I need the top of my waistband to be where these markings are. However, I need it to match up right here with the center seam. So I'm going to be putting these together at the top because that's where I need it. That's where the smallest part of my waist is, along the top of the waistband. However, I need the stitch to angle in so that it comes and contours toward the back right here and meets up with this seam. So it's all about stitching and curving, kind of angling your stitches so that they can mold to the shape and the curves of your body. And so I'm going to go ahead and baste this in place and try it on. You can also baste it along to the pants to see how that fits and matches up as well. So let's go ahead and baste this to see how it fits. If we need to adjust, add some more, take some more out so that it has a nice fit around our waistband. All right, so I have the waistband basted on. You can see right here, I told you that these pants are really stretchy, so I was trying not to stretch too much. But I will just have to go in there and probably take out a little bit more right here so that everything matches up nicely. And I also made a little fold right there, so I will fix that. But just to test it, just to baste it in place to see how everything fits, I'm really happy with this. So I'm going to go back to the machine. I'm just going to finesse this a little bit more, try to get rid of the wrinkles, fix that little fold right here, and just get everything nice and smooth. You can see the center seam. I want to make sure that that matches up to the waistband, to the center seam of the pants. I want everything to match up and be nice and clean. So again, this is just basted. I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and go over that with a permanent stitch and fix these wrinkles right here that I have. And then we can go ahead and do the same exact thing to the waistband facing. Before I stitch over the basting stitch and then trim this down, I want to show you what that waistband looks like on the inside, the one that I've just basted. You can see that it's at an angle. And so if yours is looking like this is just what needs to happen so that it fits your waistband or your waist measurement. Don't think that, oh, this is wrong. This is so that it fits your body and contours to your curves. So it doesn't look, doesn't look right, but this is what needs to happen so that it fits my body. And so if yours look a little angled and like this, we can just trim that off. It's not a big deal. So I'm gonna, again, since this fits nicely, I'm just gonna stitch right over my basting stitch, and then I'm gonna trim off the excess and match it up to the center seam of the pants. Make sure everything is nice and flat, and then I'm gonna stitch that down with a permanent stitch as well. Alright, so I've just did a regular machine stitch over the basting stitch for this waistband, and then I connected it right here, matching up this seam as best as I could. So all of this has the regular machine stitch in. I'm going to do the same exact thing that I did to this waistband, to this facing waistband. So that means you may need to pin it at an angle depending on what you had to do for your waistband. I have mine pinned at an angle. I'm going to flip this so that it's right sides facing. I'm going to make sure that I open out the seam allowance because you want everything to be flat. Don't stitch it with your seam allowances folded in. Make sure you open everything out. And then I'm just going to stitch this right sides facing the same way that I did so that it can match this waistband. Okay, I've just stitched the waistband facing. Alright, so I'm just going to open out the seams and make sure that those are even and matching up here. And I want to do the same thing for the bottom to make sure that those are also even and flat and everything matches up before I trim away. And you can see that it's matching up pretty nicely right here. So I can go ahead and trim off this excess seam allowance. And then once this is trimmed, I can connect it to the other facing up here at the top and stitch that in place. And then once that's stitched, we can fold this over and stitch it down to the pants. But first, I'm going to go ahead and trim this off. And I'm trimming it down to about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to sew the two waistbands together up here at the top. And make sure that you can line everything up. So I'm going to match up the center seams right there and pin those in place. And I'm just going to put a couple more pins to hold everything. Okay, and now I'm just going to find the original stitching line, and I'm just going to stitch all the way across, making sure that I back stitch at the beginning of and the end, and make sure that I match up the center seam right here in the waistbands. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I have just attached the two waistbands right here at the seam. So now I'm going to go and do the understitching. The understitching is the stitch that we took out that they have right here. So I'm going to make sure that I have my seam allowance facing toward the facing, and I'm going to do some understitching, and I'm going to blend it in with the original stitches. So again, making sure that all the seam allowance is facing toward the facing. I'm going to find the original stitch and just continue understitching all the way across. Alright, so here is the progress of my pants. You can see that I've made the adjustment right here to the center seam. We've attached the waistband back on. I was trying really hard not to stretch the fabric too much because, like I said, I didn't want any ripples in it, but that is fine. It smooths out once I put the pants on. And you can see I've done the understitching right here. I tried to find the original understitching and catch that and then go all the way across. Also tried to match these seams up as best as possible here. And so again, you can see that the waistband now has a curve in it. So when you take the excess out, you're just bringing that in. And so you're going to have a little bit of a dip or curve right here. So just keep that in mind. So next, before I go ahead and tack down this inner waistband, because that's really the last step, is to just fold this under and then do a stitch in the ditch right here, catching in the edge of the waistband. But before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and put all my labels back on. So the size label was actually stitched on right here to this seam allowance. So I'm gonna stitch that on, and then I'm just gonna grab these two here and just stitch those on. And then once we have those stitched on, we can go ahead and stitch down this waistband facing here, and then we'll be done with these pants. Alright, so I have stitched on my labels. I kept the little small one off, so I just have that one and the size label. I stitched that back on, and I am pinning the waistband down, putting my pants on the right side because I'm going to stitch in the ditch, meaning I'm just going to stitch right here in this groove, making sure that I catch this portion, the bottom edge of the facing on the inside. Now right here, I had a really bulky seam, so if you have that, maybe you want to trim down some of your seam allowance. And I'm just gonna continue folding this up here and then folding it over, making sure that it goes a little bit past that seam. And then I'm just gonna bring it over and put a pin in here. So yeah, it's really, really bulky right there. I'm gonna have to probably just use my hand wheel when I get to that center position. And I'm just going to continue pinning this down right here. right, I have the waistband pinned down. I'm going to begin stitching right here where there's stitching still there. And I'm just going to go straight across, stitching, and I'm going to go past here a little bit, connecting to the previous stitch. So I'm going to be stitching from the right side, making sure that I catch the inner portion of the facing. So I'm going to go to the machine now and go ahead and stitch this in place. All right, y'all, I just put in the last stitch, and so this is the finished waistband right here for my pants. I'm really excited about these. They fit great. Now, do keep in mind that if you make an adjustment like this and your pants fit your waist perfectly and they fit your hips perfectly, that you're gonna have to do a little shimmy to get them up past your hips, because, you know, we step in here first and then we pull up. So you're gonna have to shimmy to get them up if they fit your waist perfectly and you have a waist gap, different measurements between the waist and hip like I do. But this is the finished pants. Well, that is all for the video. I really do hope that it was helpful. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on your notifications. Share this video in case you know other people who have the same issue. And I will see you all in the next video. Blessings, everyone. Bye.